I want to share my experience getting diagnosed with ADHD, and I guess I should introduce myself first. Hi, I'm Derek. I'm 32, I love cats, I have lots of hobbies, I grew up in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, and now I live in upstate New York. I've organized this story into 3 sections: my background understanding of ADHD growing up and the stigmas I heard about it, how and why I ended up suspecting myself of having ADHD and wanting to be evaluated, and the process of being evaluated, diagnosed, and getting my first prescription. And I want to mention, just to make it clear, that this video is not intended as medical advice or a way to diagnose yourself. I'm not a medical professional and I'm not qualified to diagnose or even advise anyone. I'm sharing my story, and I'm hoping it can help people decide whether or not to seek professional evaluation for ADHD. Section 1. Background and stigmas. I heard things about ADHD pretty early on when I was growing up, but what I heard taught me very little about it. I had a neighbor who had ADHD. From hearing adults talk about him and his ADHD, I learned that they think ADHD medication is overprescribed and can stunt your growth, like I often heard about coffee. In middle school, I had a classmate with a very obvious case of hyperactive type ADHD. Let's call him Greg. That's not his real name, but I don't want to mention any real names in a video like this. Greg couldn't help but blurt things out sometimes. He had a bit of a short temper, and overall, he was kind of wild, random, and loud. I liked him though. One of the home something or other classes taught us how to make pillows. I made more at home using my mom's sewing machine. I made myself some and made my sister some. I talked about this in class, and Greg asked me to make him some pillows too. I forget exactly what fabrics he asked for, but I think I made him pillows with wolves and some pillows with moose or something hunting related. In middle school, I remember hearing kids have conversations about ADHD. The most common take I heard was doubting that ADHD existed. It felt like it was acceptable to just start up a conversation about why you doubted ADHD was real out of thin air. Like that was a topic and take which was perfectly acceptable to use to avoid awkward silence. I never did that myself. I never felt like I understood enough about ADHD or the human brain to justify having a take like that. But these conversations didn't really bother me or strike me as wrong because I didn't have any feelings about myself with regard to ADHD. However, since it seemed like the general consensus among other students was that it wasn't real, I kind of erred on the side of agreeing with that personally. It still wasn't something I was willing to share in a conversation because I was aware that this bias came from just listening to other kids. And what do they know? When these conversations did happen, listening was pretty much all I did. I was pretty socially awkward, and I did nothing but listen in a lot of social situations. It was like it took me 2 weeks or so of listening to the kids around me to sort of calibrate and be able to engage in conversations myself. I was also diagnosed with mild autism, but that didn't happen until I was 31. I think if I had been diagnosed as a child, I would have been diagnosed with Asperger's. Section 2. Deciding to look into it. In my school district, at the time I was attending, it had both a middle school and a junior high school. Most of the conversations among students that I mentioned in the first section of this video were happening in middle school. I don't remember hearing conversations about ADHD after I started in junior high school, and I don't think I thought about it much either. My decision to start looking into an ADHD evaluation for myself happened in my sophomore year of high school. In an English class, we were assigned to write an essay. I don't remember what this essay was about. I also don't remember when it was assigned or how long we had to write it. I think it was 2 pages double-spaced with size 12 Times New Roman font. And I remember a lot about how writing that essay went for me. I planned to finish it over a weekend. I had nothing else to do. No sports things to go to, no other homework, no family events, etc. I had the whole weekend to write this essay and then play video games or work on hobbies after I finished it. So, after breakfast on Saturday morning, I went to get started on it. I couldn't get started. I didn't know what to write. I didn't know where to go with my essay. I could sometimes picture how I'd start it, but I didn't know how I'd go from there. If I couldn't picture the middle and end, I couldn't start it. I didn't want to waste time starting it if I was going to end up rewriting my first paragraph or first few paragraphs. So I sat with the rubric and a blank Word document for some time. Then I decided to take a break. At the time, Call of Duty 4 was one of the most fun games out there. I had a PC that could play it, so I took a break by playing a few rounds of that. Then I tried getting back to the essay. Still nothing. Still no plan for the whole essay. Still nothing I felt comfortable writing down. So I took another break. I did something with my RC cars. I don't remember what, but I probably took something apart and put it back together again. Maybe I also edited a video. I don't remember exactly, but I remember there were several breaks and new attempts. And I remember that it wasn't until 10 o'clock or midnight on Sunday night before I finally got desperate enough to just start writing, even if I was going to delete the first things I wrote down. By about 2 a.m., I finally had the page requirement met. The essay was probably crap, but I needed something to hand in. And I didn't really care about my grades in a subject like English or writing or whatever it was anyway. So I got to bed by maybe 2:30 a.m. I had to get up around 6 for school the next morning. What a great way to start out the week, on 4-ish hours of sleep. When that class finally came around, I heard kids saying the essay was so easy. It took them 30 minutes to 2 hours to write. I had a conversation with one kid who said it took him 30 minutes and asked if he was really serious about 30 minutes. He was someone I trusted and thought was pretty smart. He said he really felt like it took him about 30 minutes. He didn't time it, but he thought the longest it could have taken him was 45 minutes. This made me feel dizzy. Could it really be true that other kids took 30 minutes to 2 hours to complete an essay that I struggled to even start for more or less the entire weekend? I felt like either everyone in the room was lying or there was something wrong with me. I didn't think everyone in the room was lying, and I still trusted the word of the kid I'd pulled aside and asked. So I started suspecting I had some kind of issue going on. I thought about it, and I thought about it some more. Eventually, I thought about ADHD. Could I have ADHD? I don't know. I focus just fine on things that I'm interested in. When I was 12, I spent 9 months saving money to buy a $600 gas-powered RC car. When I was 14, I spent a ton of time planning and figuring out what parts I'd need to convert that RC car to brushless electric. I had been working as a dishwasher and spending my own money on things like that RC car since I was 14. Could I have ADHD? I really didn't know, but I knew I was really disturbed by how much of my own time I had wasted on that essay and how little time the assignment had taken other students. So I talked to my parents and pleaded with them to have some kind of contact with a doctor about this. Section 3. Diagnosis and first prescription. I'm not sure how my parents decided to go about addressing this. They may have called my pediatrician first, but we ended up doing an evaluation through the high school's psychologist. My mom and I had a meeting with the psychologist to start the evaluation. I only remember bits and pieces of what was said in that meeting. I remember that my mom described to him how I would focus for hours and days on end on things like my RC car projects and editing videos. When she said those things, I thought it was over. I didn't have ADHD, and this evaluation was done. But then the psychologist said, "What you're describing is hyperfocus, and hyperfocus is actually a symptom of ADHD." I couldn't believe that. It gave me a wave of feelings of both relief and hope. Shivers went down my spine. The meeting ended with plans for my parents and a few of my teachers to do evaluations on me. The psychologist would also look through my records from elementary school. Then he would review those records along with the evaluations and make his conclusion. The evaluations my parents and teachers filled out weren't promising in terms of me getting diagnosed. My parents and teachers' answers to the questions made it sound like they felt like my performance and attentiveness were pretty normal. That was hard for me because at this point, I felt like getting diagnosed was my only chance of getting help. I really wanted help. I loved my life outside of school. I didn't want to keep wasting entire weekends on writing assignments other kids could complete in 2 hours or less. When we met with the psychologist again, he had compiled and reviewed everything and written up his report. He talked to us about my parents' and current teachers' evaluations. He said what I feared. Those evaluations were not strong indicators that I had ADHD. But then he said the best indicators would be from early childhood. And he started talking to us about what he found in the notes from my elementary school teachers. I had repeated first grade due to immaturity. He said that supported my suspicions of having a condition. Then he told us that every single elementary school teacher had made a note about me struggling to pay attention. He told us that ADHD has 2 types. He said a lot of people think there's ADHD and ADD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and attention deficit disorder. He said that's not how the current medical terminology works. There are 2 diagnoses of ADHD, hyperactive and inattentive type, and they're both considered ADHD. He felt, from the elementary school teacher's notes and the evaluations my parents and current teachers filled out, that I likely have inattentive type ADHD. He said the high school classroom can be chaotic and distracting for a teacher. Each teacher only has an hour and a half with you per day or every other day. Other kids are interrupting them with questions or random comments, and kids with hyperactive ADHD are throwing things. He said it's very easy for a high school teacher to not notice that one kid simply isn't paying attention. He said my report of having a big imagination and finding it hard to stay tuned into the classroom because I have so many thoughts of my own to tune into fit this diagnosis. Since he was a psychologist, he could diagnose me, but he couldn't prescribe medication. So he would give his report to my pediatrician and have them use their judgment and decide on treatment. I was anxious when I had my appointment with the pediatrician. I had been feeling a lot of things about the psychologist's conclusion. I felt hope for getting treatment, and I felt down about having a deficiency. This pediatrician really turned my bad feelings around, though. I need to explain one thing before talking about the appointment with the doctor. In Pennsylvania, every school district is required to have a gifted program. The test for the gifted program is an IQ test, and if a student has taken that test, the results go into their records. I was in that gifted program in my school district, but I didn't know anything about my test results. But the results were included in this report the psychologist sent the doctor. At the appointment, the doctor told me 2 things that made me feel completely differently. He said he also has ADHD, and then he told me that he and I have the same IQ score. I was speechless. I must have said something in response, but I can't remember what. He gave me a prescription for 60 18-milligram Concerta tablets. He told me it's the lowest dose and to start taking 2 when I feel like it's not doing enough anymore. I walked out of that office feeling infinitely better about my situation. It was like having lived in a world of worry and then having all of those worries flipped upside down. Now I felt like even though I had a condition that many view as a deficiency, with treatment I could become a doctor if I wanted to. One more thing this doctor mentioned, though, was that as someone with ADHD, I would likely be more susceptible to things like anxiety and depression. At the time, this didn't worry me, but I have had experiences with depression later in life. I want to share one last thing before closing out this video. I ended up getting the psychologist's report later to have medication prescribed when I was in college. I didn't read it then, I just sent it to the health center. I first read it a year or so ago after moving to upstate New York. I don't remember if I filled out a written evaluation of myself or if I ever had a one-on-one meeting with the psychologist. But based on the report, at some point I must have told him about my perspective. I want to share part of it, which made me tear up when I read it myself for the first time. He wrote, Derek's own descriptions of what his difficulties feel like impressed this examiner in terms of his reports being valid and also his apparent serious thought about his difficulty. He indicated that he has been giving specific effort toward avoiding daydreaming and following lecture and discussion during class. He explained that this feels exhausting to him, and he feels he lacks the endurance to do this over an 83-minute period, suggesting an analogy to himself as a middle-distance runner trying to keep up with the cross-country runners. I have seldom heard this clear a description from a student regarding this topic. He also describes his battle to maintain attention for reading and other schoolwork at home. He reads for a time but then realizes he has covered pages but doesn't know what it's about, and rereading is often necessary. Certainly, this is a common phenomenon, but it seems chronic and significant for Derek. He likewise describes difficulty maintaining attention for other written work and a constant battle again to concentrate and not daydream. He also admits to procrastination and avoidance, especially on large tasks where he anticipates it taking so long that he becomes overwhelmed and can't get started. Derek does not demonstrate the perfectionism, which is the sticking factor seen in some other bright, capable students. Also, consideration of anxiety or depression as contributing difficulties does not suggest that these are areas of concern. Well, that's my story about getting diagnosed with ADHD. Thank you for watching.
Hate it when my doubts and my fears swell up like the ocean. It feels like I could drown in my tears. Everything's overflowing. Scared that I won't get it right, get it right. My nerves are working overtime, overtime. Tell myself to calm down and breathe. Step out of the shadows, into the fire. Don't be afraid to be out on the wire. Live in the moment, turn it louder. This is what you're made for. You just gotta be fearless.